In competitive Fortnite, there is nothing more important than getting your drop spot uncontested, and some of the conflicts that result from this are insane. From long-time friendships being destroyed, to literal DDoS attacks over a video game, to actual wars between the communities of various countries, and much more. In Chapter 2 Season 2, Epic added multiple POIs with mythic weapons and god tier loot. Because these drop spots were so good, pro players fought tooth and nail to secure their stake at these spots, but the battle for the Grotto between Tfue's team and Chap's team would make waves in the Fortnite community. The Grotto was perhaps the most broken of all the mythic POIs, as it had the Brutus minigun, a more amped up version of the regular minigun that players famously used to condition entire lobbies in the past, so it was no surprise players wanted it all to themselves. Immediately, Tfue and Chap would claim the drop spot for themselves. Both players were seasoned veterans of Fortnite competitive and were falling behind mechanically, but intellectually, they were as good as ever. This led both players to picking up emerging controller prodigies to play with them, with Tfue picking up Scoped and Chap picking up AV. And despite weeks of fighting at the drop, neither of them were budging. Numerous tweets were exchanged on social media, all the while Tfue was consistently pulling 100,000 plus viewers on all of his streams of the fights. Now the way FNCS worked that season was there was 4 different weeks of qualifiers, and the best 200 teams from those qualifiers would then be split into 4 different heats. If you placed top 12 within your heat, you made it to grand finals. So when heats came around, the unthinkable happened. Tfue and Chap were put into the same heat, but even more shocking is they placed 1st and 3rd respectively, so now both were qualified to the grand finals. In the end though, Chap put his ego aside and ended up leaving the Grotto, a decision that ultimately paid off since Chap placed 4th in the grand finals, while Tfue placed a disappointing 16th after being contested by Legedian. It's an unfortunate situation as the two were good friends in the early days, with Chap showing lots of support for Tfue during his lawsuit with FaZe. While I'm sure neither of them care anymore, there is no denying that this off-spawn fight was very heated. In a similar fashion, there is the legendary fight for Sweaty Sands that happened in Chapter 2 Season 6 on NA East. Bizzle, Clix, and Buga, also known as BBC, were coming off of a 5th place in the season previous and were looking to do it again out of their tried and true drop spot of Sweaty Sands, but this time, someone was there to contest them. Gabe, Tahi, and Sprite were coming off in 11th due to being contested at Caddy Corner, and they knew they could do much better. So after analyzing the drop maps, they chose Sweaty Sands. Due to Clix being the largest streamer in Fortnite competitive at the time, this spawn fight got heated very fast. Unlike Tfue vs Chap though, the fight was relatively lopsided, with Clix's team losing the majority of the time, and due to Clix's chat being made up of a bunch of young kids, the blame immediately turned to Bizzle, the IGL of the trio. Bizzle was a seasoned veteran of Fortnite competitive at that point, and while his game knowledge was elite, his mechanics had fallen behind significantly. This led to many people clipping Bizzle's POV of him dying and posting it on Twitter, generating more hate. It eventually got so bad that Bizzle's name was trending on Twitter, but at the end of the day, both teams played well enough to make it to the heats. Surely they wouldn't be in the same heat. They were both placed in the same heat, and just like every other off-spawn battle, Clix's team got wiped. To rub more salt into the wounds, Sprite's team placed 17th, just enough to qualify for the reboot round, where Sprite famously pulled off the greatest clutch in Fortnite history to qualify for Grands. The fallout from this off-spawn beef put a permanent, near-career-ending hamper on Bizzle's career. No longer was he respected by the wider Fortnite community, and this would lead him into a downward spiral that eventually made him quit the game. But the off-spawn drama for Clix doesn't end there. 2 seasons later, Clix would end up with Bucky and Creo, and they would choose to drop Steamy stacks. Initially, all was well, with Clix, Bucky, and Creo placing top 3 in the 3rd qualifier for FNCS heats. If you placed top 3 in any of the 3 qualifier weeks, you went straight to grand finals, so no dealing with off-spawn battles. However, while it's nice to go straight to grands, it also presents the issue of not being able to defend your drop spot. Going into the grand finals, Bully, Krizux, and Bankteller were there to contest Clix, and it did not go well for Clix, as he placed dead last in the tournament, later tweeting that Bully was clout farming while dropping on him. But it was clear this is cope from Clix, as Bully had been dropping Steamy stacks for seasons at this point, and knew the drop in and out. But funniest of all was Bizzle tweeting out "subscribe to Paris" on YouTube, no pressure though. What he actually tweeted was a screenshot of Clix's dead last placement, so it seems that Bizzle ultimately got the last laugh. Steamy stacks would prove to yet again be a hot drop, as shown during the Chapter 2 Season 8 FNCS on EU. In the season prior, Malibuca, MrSavage, and Shizzo were relative newcomers to the Tier 1 Fortnite scene and needed a drop. They decided on Steamy stacks, where MrSavage, Refsguard, and Andretta happened to be going. Initially, the two split the drop, but because the split always favored Savage's team, Malibuca's team performed poorly, so in Season 8, Malibuca's team decided to fight for the loot. This time around, Refsguard had been swapped out for Benji Fishy, meaning that the trio they were contesting had two of the biggest EU competitive streamers on their team. While the spawn fights were relatively even, Malibuca's team always went on to perform well in the games they won, while Savage's team struggled. This led to loads of hate being directed towards Malibuca's team, with each of them receiving a myriad of cheating accusations from the young viewers of Savage and Benji. Funnily enough, Malibuca and his teammates didn't even know who Savage and Benji were since they only kept up with fellow Russian-speaking players.
I mean, the good thing is that we honestly had like no idea who they were. We're kinda watching only like CIS guys and stuff.
After Grand Finals concluded, the hate slowly died down over time as Malibuca and MrSavage built up their reputation over the span of 2022, so good for them. This is similar to Machwood vs PGod's off-spawn fight that happened in Chapter 2 Season 7 on NA. Both teams were dropping at Craggy cliffs, and the stakes were high, though it seemed as if PGod's team had the upper hand, especially with the at the time prodigy Peterbot. Due to PGod's position as one of the top Spanish-speaking Fortnite competitive streamers, the beef from this spawn fight went viral on Twitter. Back and forth tweets would be exchanged between Machwood and PGod, with PGod's fans being weirdly obsessed with the idea of PGod fucking Machwood. Some iconic clips came out of this off-spawn battle, such as when Machwood threw TK into a dumpster.
They're carrying him with them to dance on him some more. They're putting him in the trash can. They've just put him in the trash can.
Ultimately, PGod's team qualified to the Grand Finals with ease after placing first in their heat. However, Machwood's team struggled and it all came down to the reboot round, but of course with Machwood being the most clutch reboot round player ever, won his single match and secured his spot to the Grand Finals by the skin of his teeth. Everyone was hyped for the showdown that was ready to happen, but when Grands came, they didn't even contest each other, and at the end of it all, PGod's team outplaced Machwood's by a significant margin, though it seems like it was all good by the end as Machwood gave PGod his congratulations and moved on from the situation. This good ending is unlike what happened in the battle for Doom's Domain in Chapter 2 Season 4. Doom's Domain was one of the two god tier drop spots on the Season 4 map, and immediately, Bizzle and Zayt's team both put a claim on it. Each team traded blows, while also griefing each other equally as hard. The battle got so heated that it caused Zayt and Bizzle to have a falling out, with Zayt commenting on how they used to be close friends back in the 2018 days, but now hold a deep hatred for each other. And of course, Zayt being the dictator he was, kicked Bizzle out from AlphaCord, a prestigious Discord friend group made up of many old school Fortnite competitive legends. At this point, you could tell it was personal, since Zayt's entire Twitter feed for that week was filled with nothing but tweets about Bizzle. But the fighting came to an abrupt end when Bizzle, Dubs, and Mega split up from each other, leading Bizzle to play with Clix and Illest and begin dropping at Sweaty Sands. So in the end, I guess you could say Bizzle took his own advice that he had tweeted out a year prior. It has now been 4 years since this all happened, so hopefully they have put it all behind them, but it's hard to say for certain. On a lighter note, there is a famous Nickmercs vs Aydan off-spawn fight at Tilted Towers. For the longest time in the early days of Fortnite, Tilted Towers was Nickmercs' drop, but come time for PAX West and Aydan, a controller prodigy, would contest Nick. Every single fight went in favor of Aydan, but the two took it with stride and even did a post-game interview together, and later in 2018, they teamed up to play the Fall Skirmish Finals, placing a solid 9th. To this day, the two are great friends. Now many people remember that iconic spawn fight, but one spawn fight that only OGs will remember is Aim Hero and Faxfox vs Vinny and Zexrow at ESL Katowice. Going into day 2 of the tournament, Vinny and Zexrow were in the lead by a sizable margin, but out of nowhere, two unknown Korean players named Aim Hero and Faxfox contested them, putting a hamper on their performance. This significantly affected their game plan, and when all was said and done they placed 3rd. Zexrow would later go on to tweet about how Aim Hero dropping on him ruined his game and that they were doing it just to grief them. Aim Hero would later go on to say that they were simply acting strategically and doing what was best for their game. Most of the community sided with Aim Hero, especially after many dug up an old video of Zexrow bragging about contesting Bizzle. In the video, Zexrow showed Discord DMs between him and Bizzle where we can see Zexrow say, "What's wrong with contesting?" Once this irony was exposed, Zexrow would apologize, and it seems like all involved put the drama behind them, as Zexrow and Faxfox occasionally joke about it. But one thing that isn't a joke is the revival of the Napoleonic Wars from the French Fortnite scene. For some context, Kami and Setty historically have never been good off-spawn fighters, with them famously getting draxed by a console player in the Chapter 5 Season 3 FNCS. So heading into the Chapter 6 Season 1 FNCS, Kami and Setty chose to land at Lost Lake, a more low-profile spot that still had good loot. However, there to contest them this time was Podesai, X-Squeeze, and Akira. At first, Kami's trio was winning without issue, frequently tweeting out applications to work at McDonald's to mock how bad the French were playing. It didn't help that at the same time, another French team was contesting the FNCS favorite Queasy, basically turning this into France versus the rest of Europe. Sound familiar? Come time for heats, and both teams were placed in separate heats, which is bad for Kami since that meant he couldn't defend his drop spot anymore. Seeing this, Kami allegedly hired another Polish team that was in the same heat as Podesai to go and grief them. Because of this grief, Podesai's team did poorly in heats, and it all came down to the reboot round to qualify to Grand Finals, where, to everyone's shock, Podesai won, subsequently posting the greatest tweet of 2025. To make matters worse for Kami, they got wiped off spawn during the first 6 games of the Grand Finals. While their day 2 wasn't that great either, a win in game 10 gave them some much needed points, and in the end, Kami's team placed higher, so it is safe to say that every Polish player will probably need bodyguards at LAN this year since it is being played in France. While most instances of toxic off-spawn beef don't go any further than Twitter back and forths, a couple of times it became much more than that. In the DreamHack Dallas 2022 solo LAN, up-and-coming mechanical demon DiegoPlayz was in first going to the final game, but then, a random player near dead last named Oxy decided to drop on him, just to grief him. Oxy would stream himself doing this, laughing about how Diego's chance to win his first ever LAN was ruined. A short while after the tournament ended, Twitter began to blow up as news of a fight happening came up. It turns out that afterward, Diego found where Oxy was and started to throw hands. Thankfully, no video exists of the actual fight, but the aftermath was caught on camera. From what others have said, Diego and his friend gave the kid a bloody nose. While players should obviously never resort to violence, you can't help but feel for Diego in his situation. Fortunately, the story had a good ending as popular streamer Trainwrecks heard about the incident and decided to send Diego $16,000, which is double the amount he would have won had he got first. Although this story had a good ending, one long-forgotten story ended with illegal activity. In April of 2020 on the NA West region, a player named Sihllable qualified for the FNCS Grand Finals after placing 10th in his heat. 2 days later in the Grand Finals, his internet would not work and he placed dead last because of it. Sihllable would later go on to say that he was being DDoSed by another player named Skate, the player who he happened to be contesting. Sihllable posted proof of this, saying that prior to the Grand Finals, one of Skate's friends sent an IP grabber link disguised as a Fortnite drop map. Honestly, I'm not sure how you fall for that, but Fortnite kids I guess. Skate's duo partner J Roses, who was an FNCS champion by the way, later went on to admit that Skate did indeed DDoS Sihllable, and that he decided to throw away their tournament after he found out what his duo mate did. Overall, just a disaster of a situation that nobody benefited from. While being contested in competitive Fortnite is certainly annoying, it's never worth it to escalate it to the extent some of these players have. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then check out my second channel linked below, or the other videos on your screen now.